Tali come desidera sempre il nostro delegato, gentili signore, egregi signori, mi capita ogni tanto di guardare le fotografie della mia scona del XIX secolo e lì vedo un lungolago sterrato, vedo il campanile, vedo la collina con i vigneti, vedo la campagna ancora disabitata e mi colpiscono due sentimenti. Uno estetico, la bellezza di quella semplicità, e l'altro piuttosto nostalgico. Dico, ma chissà che purezza di sentimenti quei tempi. Poi però mi rendo conto che dietro quella semplicità, quella bellezza, chissà cosa c'è dietro quella povertà delle case. Cosa c'è dietro i sorrisi delle donne che ci sono sul lago a lavare i propri panni? Sarà un sorriso vero? Non sarà un sorriso vero? Dov'è il marito? Dov'è il padre? Dov'è il fratello? E sarà in Francia, in Australia o in America? E quindi per Ascona anche ci sono stati i tempi dell'emigrazione. E l'emigrazione vuol dire abbandono, vuol dire dolori, vuol dire sacrifici. Le opere di Martini, Bianconi e Aurelli ne sono la prova, così come le lettere degli emigranti pubblicati da Cheda, le cronache di uno Snider o di un Martinoli. E poi non cambia se il luogo è una valle oppure è Ascona, o il lungolago di Ascona. Parlavamo di purezza dei sentimenti, ma è un'illusione? È una domanda un po' retorica, perché l'uomo resta quello che è, con le sue debolezze, con i suoi problemi, però ha una certa generosità e soprattutto ha speranze. Grandi speranze che sono quelli che hanno condotto degli uomini del nord verso Ascona all'inizio del secolo scorso, persone che erano in cerca di una terra dove avere una vita pulita, una vita semplice, una vita ricca di sentimenti, e dopo aver errato per tutto il nord Italia sono arrivati al Monte Monescia. E lì la speranza purtroppo non è la speranza di una vita bella, di una vita pura, nella natura, come già Rousseau ce ne aveva parlato. Purtroppo le loro speranze non si sono realizzate, ma questo è un po' nella natura delle cose, mentre invece non si sono realizzate, ma hanno germogliato. Hanno germogliato su quel monte delle Monesce, Monte Monescia, dove poi da lì sono partite delle riflessioni, una ricerca della verità. Negli anni si sono succeduti molti personaggi della cultura mitteleuropea, penso a Balint, penso a Eranos e poi penso anche agli eventi letterari di adesso. E il grosso vantaggio di questo è che Ascona è diventato famoso, è diventato il sud di un nord di un sud, e la collina Monescia è diventata la collina della verità, dove le persone vengono qua per cercare la verità la ricerca della verità che muove sempre l'uomo. E allora voglio ricordarvi un mito dell'antichità. Secondo Esiodo, Pandora fu la prima donna creata da Atena e da Efesto. Gli dei, tutti gli dei, le regalarono splendide qualità, tipo la bellezza, la seduzione, la bontà. Ma Hermes, lo psicopompo, così chiamato perché era quello che accompagnava le anime dei mortali agli inferi, riempì il suo cuore di meschinità, di menzogna, di curiosità. Gli dei amavano molto giocare con gli uomini e quindi Zeus inviò Pandora a Epimeteo, fratello antitesi di Prometeo. Epimeteo fu folgorato immediatamente dalla bellezza di Pandora e malgrado il fratello gli dicesse fa attenzione perché gli dei giocano con noi, si innamorò e la sposò. Pandora trovò un vaso chiuso, e la sua curiosità la portò ad aprire questo vaso. Ahimè, Così scapparono tutti i mali che affliggono ancora oggi l'intera umanità. Spaventatissima, chiuse di nuovo questo vaso e in questo vaso restò dentro la speranza, rannicchiata in un angolo perché non era riuscita ad uscire. Quindi quel vaso di Pandora vuoto, ma con la speranza, è il mito che ci accompagnerà in questi 4 giorni al Monte Verità, prima qua ma poi al Monte Verità, al Monte delle grandi speranze degli eventi letterari del 2020. Voglio ora ringraziare chi, malgrado la situazione in cui ci troviamo, ci ha sostenuto e ha permesso che fossimo qui questa sera, ma anche i prossimi 3 giorni. Non è evidente, ma grazie a loro la cultura non viene schiacciata dalla pandemia, ma ha la sua voce e può continuare in questi 4 giorni a parlare. E questo è importante, vogliamo combattere, vogliamo difendere la cultura. E quindi per queste persone trovo che sia importante che le elenchiamo non nominalmente tutte, perché se lo meritano e le dobbiamo un grande grazie. Inizio dagli sponsor privati, la Mobiliare, Banca Raiffeisen, Hertz, Fondazioni per la Cultura, Schöner Stiftung, Fondazione Jan Michalski, Pro Helvetia, Migros Ticino, Pende Foundation, Alma Trust Stiftung e Pro Litteris. L'importantissima associazione di sostegno del Board of Patrons, il nostro partner mediatico, la RSI, la città di Locarno che questa sera ci ospita al PalaCinema, gli alberghi Eden Rock, Giardino e Seven, i promotori istituzionali, Dipartimento dell'Educazione e della Cultura del Canton Ticino con Swiss Laws, Comune di Ascona, l'organizzazione turistica Lago Maggiore Valli, il Monte Verità, e per non dimenticare chi ha lavorato in questi mesi affinché potessimo questa sera essere qui. Penso al presidente avvocato Bergonzoli, che scuso per la sua assenza questa sera, la direzione artistica di Paolo Di Stefano in collaborazione con Joachim Sartorius, Marco Solari, il nostro delegato del Consiglio direttivo, e soprattutto tutto il team degli eventi letterari che sono stati magistralmente condotti da Carmen Werner. Vi ringrazio e do la parola adesso all'onorevole Bertoli che ci saluta con un videomessaggio. Grazie.
Gentili signore e egregi signori, è la prima volta che non riesco a partecipare all'inaugurazione di eventi letterari al Monte Verità, rassegna che continua il suo percorso dopo 7 edizioni di grande successo e di consolidamento nel tempo e nel calendario ormai conosciuto della Svizzera italiana, anche se quest'anno abbiamo dovuto spostare la rassegna a seguito della pandemia. Il tema di quest'anno, anche quest'anno, è particolarmente interessante e lo è soprattutto in un periodo dove alle speranze forse sembrano, in qualche modo, sulle speranze sembrano prevalere piuttosto le paure, almeno da noi in Europa, nell'Europa occidentale. Forse in altre parti del mondo c'è ancora spazio per grandi speranze, da noi le cose sembrano essere un po' diverse, ma è necessario lavorare affinché la speranza riprenda il sopravvento sulla paura, che è facile, che è magari più concreta o più vicina, ma che alla fine porta a poco o spesso porta al ripiegamento. Io sono anche felice di lavorare per un dipartimento all'interno del governo cantonale che lavora sui giovani, per l'educazione dei giovani, che sono la nostra grande speranza per il futuro, ed è con loro che bisogna lavorare affinché sia questo sentimento e non quello della paura a prevalere in tutti i sensi. Se penso soprattutto alla difficoltà del mondo di capire la sua necessità di interconnessione tra popolazioni, tra culture, tra religioni, tra genti che vengono da posti diversi, credo che ci sia ancora molto da fare. Quindi ben venga questa edizione degli eventi letterari dedicata alla speranza, ben venga lo sguardo positivo verso il futuro, ben venga il fatto che di questo si discuta anche al Monte Verità, che è stato ed è un luogo nel quale non solo si è voluta coltivare la speranza, ma addirittura guardare molto lontane con delle utopie non realizzate, ma comunque fari nella notte di qualche cosa che invece riportava indietro o riportava a un conservatorismo primario. Grande fortuna quindi auguro alla rassegna anche quest'anno e spero che sarà seguita malgrado la pandemia, e spero che anche la pandemia, e questa è la mia speranza, la speranza di tutti noi, venga prima o poi sconfitta, si possa tornare a una vita più ordinaria.
Buonasera a tutti, buonasera ai presenti in sala e ai presenti in video. Sono Paolo Di Stefano, direttore degli eventi letterari del Monte Verità. Sono felice di aprire l'8ª edizione del nostro festival, ma devo dirvi che non è stato facile. Il virus ha reso il mondo un luogo poco ospitale e spostarsi una fatica quasi insuperabile. Lo sapevamo e lo sappiamo. Abbiamo rinviato questa edizione da aprile alla fine di ottobre con l'illusione che tutto o quasi tutto potesse finire in qualche mese. Purtroppo non è stato così, ma ci abbiamo creduto tenacemente fino all'ultimo. Dunque eccoci qua a inaugurare un festival inconsueto, di cui comunque siamo estremamente orgogliosi, anche se ha imposto soprattutto alla direzione operativa uno sforzo notevole fatto di imprevisti, di svolte e di decisioni rapide. Abbiamo dovuto fare alcune rinunce purtroppo, per esempio il cenacolo con i giovani scrittori e il programma di incontri con le scuole, sul quale gli eventi, come sapete, avevano posto molto impegno sin dalla scorsa edizione. Ora siamo qui ad aprire questi eventi che sono stati immaginati da tempo sotto un titolo che oggi può suonare anche un po' un azzardo, il titolo di un capolavoro di Charles Dickens, il magnifico Grandi Speranze, nel 150° della morte di un gigante della narrativa moderna, quello che il critico Edmund Wilson considerava il più grande scrittore drammatico che abbiamo avuto dopo Shakespeare, e colui il quale ha creato con l'immaginario narrativo, diceva Wilson, il mondo più ampio e più vario, ben sapendo che quel mondo, oltre a essere in parte immaginato, accoglieva suggestioni e drammi di una realtà economica, sociale, industriale, fatta di diseguaglianze e di ingiustizie che purtroppo sono ancora ben presenti a noi, sia pure naturalmente in forme diverse. Eccoci qua stasera a inaugurare questa edizione 2020, per nulla domati dalla pandemia, grazie anche agli strumenti della tecnologia, a cui dobbiamo cambiamenti che non sempre ci sono graditi e che però sono anche opportunità eccezionali come questa, offrono opportunità eccezionali come questa, e cioè la possibilità di comunicare emozioni, conoscenze, pensieri, non solo in presenza fisica ma anche a distanza, su un mondo che sempre più ci richiama alla consapevolezza e alla responsabilità. Ecco, su questi temi, consapevolezza, responsabilità, fiducia, che hanno a che fare con le grandi speranze, ci confronteremo nei prossimi giorni alla luce della fragilità, delle incertezze, delle paure alle quali, volenti o nolenti, ci troviamo, di fronte alle quali ci troviamo a vivere e a ripensare il nostro presente e il nostro futuro. Dunque, come direttore artistico voglio ringraziare i consulenti alla direzione, Joachim Sartorius e Isabella Dinolfo. Voglio ringraziare il direttore operativo Carmen Werner, che con Nora Bianchi, è stata straordinaria organizzatrice di una macchina molto complessa. E infine sono grato per la fiducia al presidente Eros Bergonzoli e al delegato del comitato Marco Solari, al quale rivolgo un saluto particolare e affettuoso. Infine, per chiudere questa breve premessa, ma per aprire le nostre giornate, voglio dare il benvenuto e dire grazie ai numerosi ospiti che animeranno gli incontri, a cominciare da Hanif Kureishi, uno dei grandi intellettuali e scrittori del nostro tempo, una voce inconfondibile della letteratura contemporanea, che tra poco sarà a colloquio con la giornalista del Corriere della Sera Alessandra Coppola. E quindi nel rinnovare la mia gratitudine, che estendo anche al pubblico, con il rammarico di non poterlo incrociare fisicamente, ma con l'immensa soddisfazione di saperlo comunque numeroso e attento, saluto Alessandra e Hanif, ai quali cedo la parola, e non mi resta che augurare buoni eventi a tutti.
Grazie a lei. Grazie a tutti per essere qui. Aspetto Hanif Kureishi in modo da poter avviare questa conversazione. Eccolo. Welcome in Locarno, even if you are in London. And it's a great honor for me to be here with you all and with Hanif Kureishi. He doesn't need any introduction, and Paolo already did, but he's a novelist, a playwright, a screenwriter, the Buddha of suburbia, My Beautiful Laundrette, Intimacy, and so on. Hanif Kureishi, let me start from the very end, and it's not yet about literature nor movies. My first question is more about the reason why you are on screen in London, and we are all here in Locarno wearing this, I'm not wearing, but you are wearing these face masks and worrying about each other. What's happening in the world? What we are going through? What's this pandemic? What's happening?
Well, don't ask me. I'm not the right person to ask. Like you and many people in London and presumably in Italy, what is happening to us is unprecedented. And we don't know what's going on. Certainly here in the UK, our economy is collapsing. Our businesses are collapsing. Our pubs and our bars are closing. Our shops are closing. Everybody is in a panic and they're wearing masks on the street. As you say, these are very strange days, very dark days, and they are completely unprecedented. I have 3 children who are in their 20s, and of course they are very bored by the present situation because they like to go out and they go to clubs and they like to dance and they like to see their friends. And of course they are trapped at home like everybody else. But I can say to them, the only interesting thing about this situation is the fact that that it's interesting that this has never happened before in my lifetime, and I hope it doesn't happen again. And I hope they can learn something about themselves and about the world in this strange, unprecedented, weird situation that we're living through. But I'm very sorry that I can't be there because I like to travel very much. I like to meet new people, and I like to go to places that I haven't been before. So it's a matter of great regret to me that I can't be there, but at least we are able to speak, even if we can't be in each other's physical company.
Thank you anyway to be there on screen. And we were talking about Great Expectation. Grandi Speranze is the title of this festival. But we just said that there is very strange days. We don't know what's happening. So it's kind of provocation, this great expectation. Can we still have great expectations in these strange days?
Well, I was thinking when you said that actually we have no expectations at all at the moment, because everything is collapsing and everything is going wrong, and the cinemas are closed, the theaters are closed. Perhaps the only thing that will come out of this is the fact that I'm sure people are at home and maybe they're writing. Maybe they're writing diaries, maybe they're writing stories, maybe they're writing plays, maybe they're writing for TV or novels or whatever, because we get to spend a lot of time isolated from other people. Maybe people are writing more, and maybe when this is over, there will be some very interesting new work to emerge from this, because there is much to say. One of the oddest things that has happened during this pandemic is that it's changed people's relationships, parents and children, children and older people, lovers, friends, and so on. All the relationships have changed, and it's very difficult to communicate with people in the old way. So maybe out of this will come some very interesting and unusual writing, perhaps in new forms, maybe in short films, maybe in texts. Who knows what will come out of this? These are dark days, but I haven't given up on the possibility of people being creative and wanting to speak to one another. One of the worst things about the pandemic is the fact that people are afraid of each other, you know? When you walk past people on the street, they cross the road to avoid you. You can't see their faces because they're wearing masks, and it's created a very paranoid situation. But maybe somehow we are able to be close to each other through our writing, through our storytelling. So I said at the beginning that I have no expectations at the moment, that the world seems to have gone flat. But still, I haven't given up on the possibility that people will still tell stories and they'll want to speak to one another, and I'm at least optimistic about that.
Are you writing in those days? In these days, your imagination is going somewhere?
Like a lot of people in the first lockdown in March, April, May, around that period, I didn't do much writing, and I spoke to my writer friends, and they were not writing either because they didn't know what to do. Also, those days were lovely because it was the spring here in London, you know, and London was completely empty. So I spent a lot of time with my kids cycling around the city, cycling around Soho, around Piccadilly, around Trafalgar Square, parts of London that I would never cycle around normally because it's so dangerous, there is so much traffic. So we had a really good time taking pictures, going to the park, cycling around. But this time, I think in the winter, it's going to be much more savage and much darker spiritually. But as I've said to many people, for a writer, it's no different. You know, I get up in the morning, I have coffee, I go to my desk, and whether there's a lockdown or not, it's still the same for me. So I'm writing a little, and I have a play called The Spank, which may or may not open in Turin in December, being directed by Filippo Dini, who is also acting in the piece. It's a two-hander. It's two men sitting in a bar or a pub talking. So I'm hoping that will go ahead. If it doesn't go ahead in December, I guess it'll go ahead sometime next year. And I spoke to Filippo this morning, and I have to say it's very encouraging to think about your work again, you know, and to work with other people, and to think of how you might act a particular scene, or how you might cut the scene or change it. And I found that very invigorating. I'm also preparing for next year a production of a theatre production of my novel, The Buddha of Suburbia, which has never been done in the theatre before. And also that's very stimulating to think about. So So some things are still going on, and people are planning for the future. They haven't given up entirely.
Okay, we just have to hope that in Italy they will open up theaters again. And you were talking about London and going around London. It's London, the city, I mean, it's a big character of your novels. And we were talking about Charles Dickens before, and The Great Expectation comes from Charles Dickens. And just to talk about this subject again of this festival, how did the city change in the last years, and how did it change in the last month with a pandemic? You were just saying, talking about the city empty, but there are also some deep changement in the city due to this new pandemic and the new crisis. Because, for example, I'm just saying that I read that many people are working at home now. Remote working is changing London. What do you think about the city exactly? What's happening through the city?
Well, that's a very interesting question, because the city has changed completely since the early months of this year. And of course, as you know, in March, April, it completely emptied. The streets were completely deserted, and it hasn't gone back to normal. And whole parts of London are now completely empty. And the part of London I live in, West London, there are many office blocks just down from here, down the road, and full of office workers and coffee shops and so on and so on. And that hasn't gone back to normal. As you say, people are working at home now. The other thing is that many of my friends, they've all moved, and I'm sure this has happened in New York as well, maybe in Italy as well. People have moved out of the city. They've gone to the country. So the city is much more empty. It's much more deserted. So we'll see if anybody ever comes back to the city, or whether the city is permanently changed. I mean, one of the problems, I grew up in the suburbs in the 1950s and 1960s. So coming to London at the end of the 1960s and through the 1970s was a huge excitement for me. And I loved writers of the city, Dostoevsky, of course, Balzac, and of course you mentioned Dickens, who wrote wonderfully, of course, as you know, about London. So coming to London was a huge excitement. And in my novel, The Villa of Suburbia, I wrote partly about punk, about the music venues, about the bars, about the squats, and about life in London in the 70s. Since then, London has got richer and richer. And one of the terrible things about London is that it got too rich. There are too many rich people here. And it made the city much more sterile, let's say much more antiseptic, you know, than it was before. I preferred it when it was rougher, when it was dirtier. Now there has been this huge change because of the pandemic, and I'm very interested to see what sort of city is going to emerge out of these changes, and whether there'll be any significant changes, because the economy has collapsed. People are not earning any money. Businesses have collapsed. The shops are closing, but in their place, other things will start up, and I'm very interested to see what will go on, and I will watch it very carefully and even write about it, I think, eventually. It's very difficult to write now, you know. Nobody knows how to write now, because do we write about people with masks? Do we write about COVID? Do we set what we write before the COVID? Do we set it? We can't set it after the COVID, so we have to set it during the COVID. But which period during the COVID? So there are many difficult questions. We talk about normal, whether the world will ever return to what we knew before as normal. But the normal is gone. There is no normal anymore. We are living in an age of permanent crisis, I think, at the moment. And whether there'll ever be another normal, again, is also a question that I can't answer, but I'm looking forward to finding out the answer.
But what I'm understanding, and I'm very interested in what you're saying, you, I understand in your work that often crises had been transformed into art. You lecture about writing. I read that you have been collecting how-to books on writing since you were a teenager. And at the end, you came to the conclusion that writing means breaking the rules, let the imagination come in. And I'm quoting, imagination means hope, rebirth, new way of being. So what you're saying that we have a word, a city, a house, everything to imagine again in some way.
Yeah, we do. We have to be bold, I guess, because as you say, I'm a professor of creative writing and I read my students. And if there's anything I would say in general about my students and their writing, is that it's not bold enough. It's not imaginative enough. It's quite small. And I try and encourage the students to use their imaginations and to do stuff that's much more crazy, much more adventurous. And maybe, as I said earlier, something like that will come out of the world we're living in now, because it's like a sci-fi movie. So we have to find new metaphors for the virus. How can we describe this virus? What kind of language will we use? Is it like a dream? Is it like a nightmare? What sort of thing is a virus? How will we characterize it? How will we speak about it in the future? How will we use an imaginative language of poetry and drama to describe it? You know, language is always behind. There is an event, and then we find the words to describe it. The language always distances us slightly from our experience. You know, when you listen to people speaking, they always say, I couldn't find the words. And I understand that, because we are looking for a language to describe something that we've never had before. And so that's interesting. That's a good opportunity, because we don't know what's going on. We don't know how to describe it politically. I have to say, one of the things that has been very moving and very interesting to me during the pandemic has been simultaneously, since the death of George Floyd, has been the rise of the Black Lives Matter movement. And that's been very stimulating and interesting, because although we have a pandemic, we also have an important social change. And we are changing the way that we think about whiteness, the way we think about race, the way we think about privilege, the way we think about our history. So it hasn't been all terrible. This is a very interesting movement, I think, that will certainly change the West, certainly change the US, certainly change France, Britain, countries that have, as you know, many you might call racial issues. So I've been very happy about the Black Lives Matter movement, because we're now beginning to hear from people who haven't spoken before. We're beginning to see our prejudices. We're beginning to look at our history, as I say, from a new angle. So it's not all so terrible. And this is, you know, Britain in the next generation is going to be 25% at least people of color and people of mixed race, like me, my children and their children and so on. So these changes also bring about intellectual changes, changes in which we see the media, in which we see the history, in which we rethink our novels and so on. So some interesting stuff has been happening this year, along with the terrible stuff.
This is a good assist for a question I would like to ask about immigrants and about optimism. you have written about immigrants' optimism, and you referred above all to the first generation. I mean, to the generation of your father, and I am also thinking to Omar's uncle in My Beautiful Laundrette. I quote, "In this damn country, which we hate and love, you can get anything you want. That's why I believe in England." That is Omar's uncle in My Beautiful Laundrette. Did this vision change, or is it different from yours or your son's point of view, this immigrants' optimism?
Well, you know, you're Italian, and the Italians go to the US as well as to other places. And the Italians went to the US just as the Indians, the Pakistanis, and the Bengalis came to the UK. And they came here with a lot of hope, with a lot of optimism and a belief in the future. And of course, as you also know, some of them did very well. And some of them ran up against a lot of barriers. And the barriers were to do with prejudice, to do with race, to do with the empire, to do with our history. Am I optimistic? Well, I'm optimistic when I saw the demonstrations in London during the summer and the riots in the US after the death of George Floyd, because I really felt that people were rebelling against the way race has marginalized us. My father came here and he believed in British fairness, but at the same time, it's been very difficult for people of color to get into positions of power and to make the same progress as white people. So now, because we've been in the UK for so long, in the post-war period, these demands have become very exciting, and there is change, and there will be more change. And I think that immigrant spirit that you speak of, I think it still exists. And I certainly noticed it around 10 years ago when London was full of people from Italy, full of people from Spain, full of people from France, particularly, you know, from the EU. After Tony Blair opened the doors to the EU, lots of Polish people, Romanian people, and so on. And London was also very exciting at that time because all these new people that had come to our city have brought a new hope and a new energy to our town. And they made it very, what you might say, very fizzy, very lively and energetic. The Brexit debate and the Brexit exit has been very destructive for the spirit of our country. And that, along with the pandemic, has brought about a terrible decline in the UK. One of the things we are good at in the UK, though, is culture, is writing, is dance, is theatre, musicals, film, television, and so on. So, as I said earlier, I haven't given up hope despite the circumstances.
Do you think that Brexit will have consequences for the next years, or it was just more a fear that it could have been? Do you think that you will still, England, Great Britain will will go through a very bad time, not only for the pandemic, but as the consequences of Brexit, its long-term consequence?
Yeah, Brexit was what we call a populist moment, a populist uprising, you know, and it was negotiated by some very shady, dodgy people. And I think it was a real shame for our country that Brexit happened at all. And I think we will come to regret it. And I think there will be, unfortunately, the deal we will have with the EU after Brexit will not be anything like as good as the deal we have already with the European Union. So I think, along with the pandemic, I think there'll probably be an economic crash. I think there will be huge unemployment. It'll be a very sad situation. But, you know, Britain has been in decline for a long time. Since the war, really, it's been crumbling and falling apart because of the end of the empire and the death of the British spirit. But that means that we can invent something new. We don't have to be an economically powerful nation. We don't have to be a rich nation. We can reorganize ourselves around other values, which are to do with community, to do with equality, to do with freedom, and to do with the integration of minorities into the center. You know, Britain has been very progressive when it comes to getting rid of the church, very progressive when it comes to freeing gay, lesbian people and so on. And we're making a new progress in terms of race. So it's possible to make moral progress. It doesn't have to be economic. Mm-hmm. The economic is over, it's collapsing. But there are other forms of progress that we can make, which we can imagine we can make. We don't have to allow ourselves to be destroyed. There are new ways of creating a healthy country.
Maybe we can think also about new progress against fundamentalism. You talk about it, you wrote about it in the 80s when it was a kind of fundamentalism. In the Black Album, during the fatwa against Salman Rushdie. I don't know if you heard news today from Nice. There were 3 people stabbed to death. Is this another kind of fundamentalism, or what's happening also in this subject, on this issue?
What I would like to see, what I would like to hear, other Muslim people condemning these kind of attacks. As you say, I've been involved in this matter since the beginning, really since the attack on Salman Rushdie in 1989. And I was horrified that such an important writer and such a, let's say, beacon in our community should be attacked by his own community. I was horrified. And I was also horrified subsequently that so few Muslims stood up for Rushdie, because free speech benefits all Muslims, you know, and it'll benefit their children and their children's children. So what I would like to see in circumstances like this is an outcry, particularly from the Muslim community, who will argue that that this is not done on their behalf and in the name of their ideology. I mean, one of the reasons we have Islamophobia is because of the behavior of a small number of Muslims who are bringing disgrace to Islam and to the name of the Prophet. And I would like to see more decent Muslims stand up and condemn from the mosques, intellectuals, anyone who is horrified as indeed I am, as you are, by what happened in France today, and certainly the attacks on Charlie Hebdo, a very important magazine, satirical, that attacked all the institutions, whether it's the Catholic Church, whether it's Macron, whatever. These institutions are very powerful, very secretive, and can be very abusive. And we need criticism, and Muslims need criticism. And they would be very well advised to stop all kinds of violence, because it only creates Islamophobia. And so, yeah, I'm appalled and horrified, and I want to see Muslims speaking out against this kind of violence.
We talk about the consequences of pandemia outside in the city, in the country, but let's talk about also this consequences inside, in the houses, in home. And we said that it will bring changement in the relationships, in marriage, maybe in love affairs. how did, till now, how did you think that this pandemic changed the personal world?
Well, I would imagine that it's very difficult for some people to be sitting at home with people who although they like them, they don't expect to be with them 24/7. You know, and it's very important to get away from people. You only really miss them if you're away from them. So as I said before, I would imagine there's going to be some very interesting and very amusing stories about people who are stuck in various locations with people for months on end, weeks and months on end, who they never expected to be stuck with. And you can get to know people too well, and you can start to hate them as well as love them, because, of course, all relationships require some distance. So I think there could be some very funny and very amusing stories of people who have had to live with people they really don't like. My own circumstances are, I have to say, are very fortunate. And I have an Italian partner who I like very much, and she seems to put up with me. So it hasn't been so difficult. But if you didn't like the person and you're stuck with them in a small box for very months, you would want to kill yourself as well as killing them, I would imagine.
Let's talk also about sex. In your work, it has always had a strong role, you know, in your novels, even from the beginning of your work. Is it changing with times go by? Also, how do you use sex in your work? I mean,
Well, I grew up in the early 1960s, and I grew up at a time when you never saw images of people without their clothes on, and nobody ever talked about sex. And then the 60s happened, as you know, and there was the outbreak of pop and the revolution. And then in the 70s, friends of mine started living in communes. People started to come out as gay and lesbian and so on. So I've lived through a very exciting, you might say, explosion of changes to sexuality that, of course, is very interesting. And many people have asked questions about what indeed sex is, where it begins, when it ends, when it starts, what it is, what it does to us, how it makes us crazy, etc., etc. So I've written about this in the Buddha of Suburbia, in the Black Album, and about gay sexuality in my beautiful laundrette, thinking about the way that that we love each other and the way in which we have sex. These, you might say, social issues have permeated my work. And of course, I'm an older man now, and I have older friends, and I have some even older friends, you know, and my friends, even when they're in their 70s, even when they're in their 80s, they're getting divorced, they're getting remarried, they're finding new partners, they're doing all kinds of weird, strange things. So it's not as if people have given up on love and sex when they, you know, when they are 50 or 60 years old. It's still going on. So I'm fascinated by this and by what's going on and how people love each other. So I'll continue, I guess, to write about it, because I grew at a time when it was very difficult to talk or to think about sex at the end of the 1950s and 60s, and to be gay, of course, at that time was totally illegal. So the ways in which we love relate to one another, and the ways in which we don't have always interested me, and it's worth writing about, to see how what we call sex, how it changes, metamorphosizes throughout the generations, and what it's like for my kids and what it would be like for their kids, and so on. That's why I write about it, and it's a very important subject to think about, how we love each other.
Do you talk about love and sex with your kids? And how do they react? How do they, what's the difference with the new generation?
I think they're far less obsessed with it than my generation was, because it was so scarce at the beginning, and then there was so much of it around in the 60s. And then in the 70s, there was a lot of people who had a lot of pressure to have sex and to have a lot of sex with a lot of different people. Um, Obviously, my kids don't tell me much about their private lives. They don't want me to know about it. But I don't think that I think they're much more concerned about making a living, and wondering about how they're going to get an apartment or a house, and how they're going to get a career, and how they're going to establish themselves in this difficult world. Obviously, they have girlfriends and so on, but they're very regular in that sense. They're not as interested in it as a thing as certainly the generation of the 60s and 70s that I grew up in was.
And your relation with new generation, let's go back to your work as a lecturer, as a teacher. What do you think of the new writers? Do you look for a confrontation? Do you seek to have a dialogue with new writers? Do you like to work with new generation, or you don't, or are you curious?
I like to read my students. I read my students with interest. I don't read the latest novels. I watch movies and I watch television, but I don't read the novels of young people at all. I don't know why. And none of my friends, we mostly read history or philosophy or sociology or something with real information in it. I read very little fiction now. I don't know why. I've just grown out of it. But I believe there is a new generation of young writers, particularly from Asia, particularly from Africa. Writers from places like Pakistan as well have become very well known in the world. And I'm very happy about that because, as you know, as we all know, literature only develops because there are new voices. We hear from new people, and suddenly you think, wow, yeah, there's this new voice, there's this new world, they're writing in a new way. And I find that very exciting. I'm very happy that particularly writers from Africa, I'm very pleased that they are writing, that their work is being published and people are interested in them. Just as when I was a young man, people published my work and were interested in me as a new voice, as a new writer, because culture only develops really out of newness, out of innovation, and out of shock. People being shocked by what the new generation have to say about their world.
So, what did you learn about listening to new voices? It's my very last question, and I want to close with this new generation of these new voices coming all around the world and making Europe and the Western world alive again.
Well, I really feel we've come to the end of something, and I guess it's called neoliberalism, which was really, I guess, adopted or invented by Thatcher and Reagan in the early 80s and through the 80s, which is the turnover of super capitalism. And as we can see with this pandemic, and we can see with Brexit, it's really come to an end. And we're really in a decline. We're really at the end of something. And I think we have to reorganize our world and our society in a new way. And I think that makes it exciting. I think we really have to use all our cleverness, all our intelligence, all our imagination to make a new world that is far less exploitative, far less racist, and a world that enables the voices of young people to really participate in the future. You know, I want to see a world run by young people who are mostly concerned. They have many concerns, but mostly about climate change, which is a huge issue for them, and also about inequality. And so, although we're at the end of something, or although the world is declining, and certainly Britain, the Britain that I live in, feels like, and certainly Italy, I would imagine too, feels like a very old country, very old and very tired and really broken country. You know, these two countries, Italy and Britain, that were so glorious once.
So old.
And are now old and broken. But out of the old and brokenness, you know, something will emerge if we give space to young people, if we listen to them and allow them to rise up through our world and take control. I mean, it's amazing when you see Merkel or when you see Trump, and when you see Biden and so on, how old they are. And I really want to see young people running things from now on. I'd be very interested to see if they can make a better world than the one we already have.
Thank you so much. These are great expectations. And
They are.
Yeah, they are. I'm so happy that we could end this strange meeting, strange day with such a good vision. So thank you so much.
Thank you,
thank you,
Alessandra.
thank
you very
you,
much,
thank you,
everybody.
thank you,
Okay.
everybody. Thanks, many thanks.
Okay.
Grazie,
Okay.
grazie.
Bye bye.
Bye. Grazie a voi tutti. Bello chiudere con queste, neanche a farlo apposta, con queste grandi speranze che ci ha lasciato Hanif Kureishi. E prima di concludere ascoltiamo le indicazioni per uscire dalla sala che ci verranno dai responsabili.
Funziona? Ok. Volevo chiedere la vostra collaborazione per l'uscita, partendo dal basso, una fila alla volta, in modo tale da uscire ordinati e anche per rispettare le distanze. Grazie a tutti.